Bondi might not have gotten the right memo about how to lie to MAGA, which is something that Trump has done a lot, because she seemed to think maybe they could promote this Epstein story and act like they were going to give out the client list and other things, not do it, and that would just work out. It didn't work out. Trump fired her in part because she couldn't get the Epstein story to go away, and it has clearly dogged his second term. Now, Blanche was running point on Epstein before he even got this promotion. I mention that because it's a reminder of which things Donald Trump actually cares about. The Epstein story involves him, his political vulnerability, and he may care about that a lot more than, say, the DOJ fighting crime or high prices or a million other issues. And Blanche's failures surrounding the Epstein files could be a big deal tomorrow. I'll tell you that several Epstein survivors have now publicly come out urging the Senate to reject Blanche's nomination. And if you're saying, okay, well, all kinds of people have views about his nomination, I would just remind you something that we learned over the last year, which was these brave survivors and many of their allies and some of their expert lawyer advocates had more effect on getting things through Congress and ultimately getting the bipartisan Epstein transparency law through Congress than a heck of a lot of other people. So I would just say it's an obvious observation that you ignore them as a Republican politician at your peril. And remember, it was Blanche who claimed that after a partial release of some documents, that would be the end of the transparency process.
Today's release marks the end of a very comprehensive document identification and review process. After submitting the final report to Congress as required under the Act and publishing the written justifications for redactions in the Federal Register, the department's obligations under the Act will be completed.
That is the face of the Trump DOJ's approach to the Epstein issue. That release, though, was incomplete. Blanche talked about a review process. It was also incomplete. And I say that as judiciously as possible. There are other words you could come up with. The released files had dozens of survivors' names that were failed to be redacted. And so that raised the question about what they were doing, spending all this time potentially trying to do secrecy for Trump, and whether by oversight, malfeasance, or any other allegation, not apparently caring much about, again, these brave women, some of whom were girls at the time, who had stepped forward. Now, one survivor who chose to be public, Danny Bensky, spoke out then.
It's horribly distressing for survivors because, you know, we've had so many conversations with the Democrats, the Republicans. We're in offices and we're constantly saying how important the redaction process is and getting it right is. You don't expect to see your name, of course, right? And so as you're scrolling to see your name, it just brings up, it really is a level of PTSD that survivors are met with often.
A fair point, one we might want to listen to, one that might at least be worth hearing as we consider the country through our elected officials in the Senate, as we consider whether this person is fit to take on the promotion to be the most powerful law enforcement official in the country, who, according to at least some Epstein victims, failed them. Should Bensky be heard by our Senate? Well, we do the news around here. I have a little news on the confirmation process. She is among those testifying tomorrow. So she will be included, her voice heard by senators in both parties. And I could tell you she is testifying against Blanche getting this promotion. So there's a lot of evidence the DOJ failed to follow all of the requirements under that law, and that had an impact, of course, on these survivors. And then the process, however, slowly went forward. So it was weeks after that, I'm reminding you, that a federal judge ruled Blanche had conceded effectively violating the law by failing to even do what any lawyer would normally do, which is, present in court. What's your defense? What's your rebuttal? When he failed to do that, as a legal matter, it was treated as conceding breaking the Epstein law. And that judge ordered the DOJ to then deal with those files and unredact them, or at least do what Blanche had failed to do, like so many other Trump officials. They see how far they can get away with just flouting or ignoring orders. I can tell you that Blanche's DOJ ultimately did not choose to defend its actions. That case is on appeal. So there's a lot for Blanche to address tomorrow. And then there is the Senate math. These are people right? They represent their states. They are officials. We talk about them sometimes like they are instruments of government, but they are people. And we are all, as we know, mortal. And Lindsey Graham, who died, has changed the overall math in that committee. Republicans now down to a one-seat edge. That is just the public fact. I don't say that during the period of mourning and remembering his time in office as anything other than the reality. We deal in facts and evidence here, the reality of the votes on that committee. And so it means they can only lose one.
Afraid that the next administration, if we don't win, we're going to all be investigated and indicted. Think about that. This is not a third world country. This is America. And the existing administration is afraid that they're going to get indicted.
Gosh, how could that ever happen? In America, no less. That is, of course, Todd Blanche, who is up for the promotion to the very powerful job of Attorney General. The hearing is tomorrow. Republicans have a one-vote margin, as I was reporting on that committee now. And I want to welcome New York Times contributing writer Molly Jong-Fast and former federal prosecutor and relevant tonight, a former congressional counsel, John Flannery. Welcome to you both.
Good to be here.
Good to have you, Molly. I went through how we got here, and the Epstein part matters, and it's clearly mattered in how Republicans have voted on these issues. Where do you see that figuring in tomorrow?
So I think Epstein is still, remember, there is a school of thought. There are people who believe that Trump is still trying to distract from the Epstein files even now. And you'll remember they did dominate the zeitgeist for a couple months there. And so now we have more of these survivors out talking. And I think it's important to just pull back and see what the survivors say, which is the release was a failure, right? They were re-traumatized again. Their personal information was shared publicly. Danny talked about her address being published. Like, this was not how it was supposed to go. And there's still clearly a lot more files that are not, and have not been released.
What they're saying is simple. It's very easy to follow.
Right.
They're saying this particular nominee was more involved in that failed release than any other person at DOJ.
Right.
So pick someone else rather than acting like, or perhaps showing that you don't care.
And they are not the only people saying that. Remember, Pam Bondi said that.
In what sense?
Pam Bondi said that Todd Blanche was more involved with the Epstein files.
Yeah. Well, I think she said that because of their own sort of internal DOJ issues.
I'm just saying,
but
yeah, she did say it, though. And so she and the survivors are both saying the same thing.
Yeah. And so on that point, I mean, John, I mentioned you have many credentials, but one is that you've been a lawyer inside the congressional process, which is a certain kind of mode. And I want to show one of these sort of what they call PSAs or political ads that's new from some of the survivor groups about Blanche.
Okay.
I am an Epstein survivor.
We were exposed.
Nude pictures of victims were released.
Our family's safety was put at risk.
Now, Todd Blanche wants to be the Attorney General of the United States.
Todd Blanche had a duty to protect us.
Instead, he protected the people
who committed crimes against us.
We deserve better.
Our country deserves better.
Vote no on Todd Blanche for Attorney General.
John, how does that figure in tomorrow?
Well, it's powerful. And I think that if I were advising a senator who's asking questions tomorrow, I would say to the nominee to be Attorney General, would you turn to these people and apologize that you've ignored them all this time? And will you agree to do something in this case right now? And why haven't you? And why have you concealed 6 million documents? Why have you bracketed things and withheld them and had to change things online? And aren't you in violation of a court order long since ignored by you when it was supposed to be done by a date certain and it wasn't? So I think all those things should be said. But I think it's a mistake if we don't talk about other things that are fact indisputable. One is, of course, the order by Judge Williams. That's a powerful order. It says that the acting Attorney General is in a position to have a claimant, Trump, sue himself, the agencies, pretend this is a conflict in a system that requires a conflict for a judge to be involved. And the judge, in a way, invoked a long phrase that people admire, which is, no one should be a judge in their own case. That conflict is traveled by Blanche, has traveled by Trump and everybody who was involved in the case. And the facts are indisputable that they wanted to have immunity from audits, and they wanted $18 billion as a slush fund to pay off those they'd already pardoned for whatever purpose they could, except to just be arrogant and put it in our face. They had to back off that. The second thing is Maxwell is also a person he can't run away from. The fact is there. It happened. He did it. We have what he said. Those two things alone, plus the Epstein failures, it seems to me, if we make those clear, two things are going to happen. We are either going to get 2 votes that will kill his nomination in committee, or at least not commended to the floor by some other trick, or we're going to identify people who in the upcoming elections have to carry this, even as we can expect that Blanche will do more and worse things to keep his phony baloney job at the behest of Trump.